We meet again. There's about 30 of us in this evening's group, which is nice. The format of the evening, if there are any newcomers, is very straightforward. We'll have a sort of quiet start to the evening. We'll do the puja, just the opening parts of the puja. Take the 3 refuges and 5 precepts, and then we'll sit for a bit, and then we can have an exchange of reflections and thoughts. We don't have a specific theme, but we'll just see what arises. And just a few introductory words. It's always useful to sort of put these meetings into context. They're really an opportunity to stop, pause, reflect, digest and process whatever dramas we may be going through in life, and hopefully just get a different perspective on our concerns and tribulations. As we know, the Buddha pointed out the fact of suffering, and there's probably not a member of our group this evening who hasn't suffered in some way or finds life as aspects of suffering which hurt, which is what suffering is. And it's interesting to reflect on, what was he pointing to? What was he trying to encourage others to realize for themselves? Because he claimed that he'd found the end of suffering. And perhaps one thing we might explore this evening is what is meant by the words end of suffering. Because it sounds a very tempting prospect, something we all probably aspire to, but somehow life keeps on, the experience is that life keeps on preventing us from being fully happy, that something always comes along to spoil it. And so we might think of that as our theme this evening. What is meant by the end of suffering? So we will do the evening chant, the dedication of offerings. The chanting, I'd like to stress, is really, is an optional aspect of practice. At the heart of real practice is inquiry. It's really a question. It's the recognition that the things that make us happy, or we think make us happy, almost invariably end up disappointing us in one form or another, either by coming to an end or by turning into something quite different, which is the same as coming to an end. That's really the heart of practice. Being curious, not giving up, being determined to find out, and having what in Buddhist language is called faith, or shraddha, which is essentially trust that there is a resolution is possible. And what the chanting does really is just one of the accretions, one of the sort of external forms, which can become very, very significant for individuals. It creates an association. It's actually verbalizing in words and in actions a special relationship to a set of injunctions, frames of reference, which are designed to help one find peace, find the end of suffering. I do, coming from a Western background, as most of us are this evening in this group, I do sometimes sort of wonder, well, what's the difference between my chanting Buddhist chants and chants that are chanted in different religions? And the objective answer to that, I think, is very similar, probably. It's a question of what significance, what importance one gives it. And I think it's helpful to remember that that one of the first sort of imprisonments that we need to get rid of or get through is belief in rite and ritual, that in some way that on its own will solve all our problems, will give us insight. The first of one of the 10 fetters, one of them is not having blind sort of faith or trust in rites and rituals. So it's interesting to have that injunction and have that pointed out as a fetter, and yet at the same time go in and do some chanting. But chanting it creates an association, and with practice it can put one into a sort of helpful frame of mind, which is conducive to the practice of meditation and inquiry. So we'll do that together. You'll all be muted, so we won't have any echoing. I'll just chant in English and in Pali. I think we'll do the both together, in Pali and in English. And if any questions come up for you, either in the words that we're chanting or on the theme, we'll make sure that we have some time towards the end of our meeting this evening, in the afternoon, the latter part, to have an opportunity for questions and answers. Because although I'm sort of unfortunately or fortunately do most of the talking, essentially it's a dialogue. So even though we might not be having a spoken dialogue, this is an opportunity to really reflect on the words that are spoken. You don't have to agree with them. They're for consideration, which is something that has really always appealed to me in this particular tradition. In fact, in the Buddhist tradition generally, there are no mandatory injunctions. There are pointers, suggestions, and injunctions, but they're not backed up by any terrible threats of hell realms or places where we don't really want to go. So, with Wangdu's help, we'll put the chapter, the dedication of offerings of page 2 up, and I will light a candle here behind me. You can do the same if you have a shrine to do that. Again, it's another symbolic act, a flame of light representing awakening in the privacy of your room or if you're sitting, another little sign marker of association. Yo so bhagava araham samma sambuddho, to the Blessed One, the Lord, who fully attained perfect enlightenment. Swakato yena bhagavata dhammo, to the teaching which he expounded so well. Supatipanno yasa bhagavatu savaka sangho, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Tamayam bhagavandam sadamam sasangham, to these the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Imehi sakare yataraham marupitehi apipujayama. We render with offerings our rightful homage. Sadhu no bhante bhagava suchira parini bhutopi. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, Pachima Jamata Nukam Pamanasa, still had compassion for later generations. Ime Sakare Dukatapanna Karabhute Patikanhatu. May these simple offerings be accepted. Amha kandi garatam hitaya sukhaya, for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddham Bhagavantam Abhipami. I render homage to the Buddha, the blessed one. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo, the teaching so completely explained by him. Dhammam Namasami, I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho, the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Sangham Namami, I bow to the Sangha. Andamayam Buddhasa Bhagavato Kubhavaga Makaram Karamase. Now let us pay preliminary homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. We turn to page 128, taking of the three refuges. And we'll start on the third paragraph, the Buddham Saranam Gacchami, having chanted the preliminary homage. Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami. To the Buddha, I go for refuge. To the Dhamma, I go for refuge. To the Sangha, I go for refuge. Dutiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami. For the second time to the Buddha, I go for refuge. For the second time to the Dhamma, I go for refuge. For the second time to the Sangha, I go for refuge. Tatiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami. For the third time to the Buddha, I go for refuge. For the third time to the Dhamma, I go for refuge. For the third time to the Sangha, I go for refuge. And we'll go straight through to the five precepts. Panatipata Paramani Sikhapadam Samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. Adinadana Varamani Sikhapadam Samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given. Kamesu Mechachara Varimani Sikhapadam Samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Musawada Varimani Sikhapadam Samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. Sura Meraya Majja Pamadatana Varimani Sikhapadam Samadhyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drink and drugs which lead to carelessness. Imani Pancha Sikhapadani Silena Sukatim Yanti, Silena Bhogasampada, Silena Nibutim Yanti, Tasma Siddham Visodaye. These are the five precepts. Virtue is the source of happiness. Virtue is the source of true wealth. Virtue is the source of peacefulness. Therefore, let virtue be purified. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And just bow 3 times. So as we make ourselves comfortable on our cushions or chairs or seats or wherever we're sitting, we can notice the transition that we've made from our ordinary sort of daily functioning to something which has a sort of different dimension to it. We digest the chanting, the words that we've chanted, and what it actually means. Making a determination to live by a certain code of values or ethics, which could be summed up as being based on truth, truthfulness, on respect, and kindness or compassion. They're basically very affirming values, which in themselves are conducive to well-being. Living in harmony with oneself and living in harmony with others is quite different to a state of disharmony, which is stressful, which is why some translators translate dukkha as stress. It can also be referred to as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. And so we'll have a period of silence now. And in that silence, we put ourselves into a comfortable position, sitting upright, adjusting our legs, our bodies in such a way that enables us just to be awake and present and conscious of what we're experiencing. We're not going to some artificial super state of some kind. It's just simply being present and noticing the simple act of sitting, of being still, being silent, noticing all the sensations in the body, and in response to those, again, adjusting our position a bit further if it requires. Allowing the breath to settle. A very nice mantra that Ajahn Chah was speaking about, of here and now. So breathing in, we can just say here to ourselves, here, H-E-R-E, right here. And on the exhalation, we just say now, N-O-W, present in this moment. We can say it, so whisper it to ourselves if we wish. And just use each breath, in-breath and out-breath, to bring us into the present, into the here and now. It's not possible to relax by force or determination. It's actually more a question of allowing the body to relax. We maintain an upright posture. So relax doesn't mean collapse, it just means relax. And it's nice to associate the out-breath, the exhalation, with that shift into a quieter state of just relaxing into the out-breath and perhaps pausing for a second or two at the end of the out-breath. Sitting quietly can be immensely restorative. We don't have to be anybody, don't do anything. A sense of pressure to perform, to meet other people's expectations, basically can just fade into the background. We can keep our eyes closed completely, or just partially, or indeed even leave them awake if necessary, open if necessary. Whatever works best. As we sit in present moment awareness, we notice not only our external body, the touch of clothes or materials against our skin, the weight of our bodies on the cushion or the seat that we're sitting on, the pressure on the legs if we're sitting cross-legged, the position of the hands and arms, and of the head on top of the spine. We can also notice the energetic inner body as well. That sense of vibration some people experience, tingling in the body, the movement of the abdomen and the lungs, in-breath and out-breath, inflow and outflow of air. You might find or notice a tingling on the scalp, touch of air on the skin, of the face, around the eyes and forehead, temples, back of the head, the ears. What are we noticing? Is it sensations in the body? Are we thinking about something? Is the mind just wandering and jumping from one thing to another? Our task is just to notice what we're experiencing and noticing how engaged we get in whatever we're experiencing. So there are a few constants. Whilst we're alive, there's the breath, always coming and going, which is why it's such a wonderful basic object of mindfulness or meditation practice. If we're able to relax whilst breathing, if that happens or takes place, we find that our center of gravity can drop and we become better grounded, centered in the lower part of the body. Out of the head and into the body. It's very natural for any issues that we might be experiencing in life to come to mind. As the mind locks into the issue, we get a corresponding sensation in the body. An emotional reaction to whatever we might be experiencing in life. And we just breathe in and breathe out, let it come, let it go. So we have our bodies. We have the pleasant, unpleasant states of sensory experience of the body. We have a mind state. One could call it the emotional tone of the mind body. And we have the contents of the mind in terms of the thoughts and associations that come to mind. All four of these are coming and going, changing. Where we were 10 minutes ago is different to where or what we're experiencing now. So what gives rise to the sense of continuity that we have? It's our consciousness. It strings all these experiences together. So we can say to ourselves, I am aware. There is awareness. What I'm aware of is constantly changing. Nothing fixed in it at all. But awareness itself, consciousness, mindfulness, is there all the time, is here all the time. We are it all the time. Awareness or consciousness is the same for each one of us. What will be different will be the contents, what we are aware of. Will vary from one person to another. Awareness or consciousness is quite empty in itself. It just gets filled up, as it were, by experiences. So practice can consist of just simply coming back to present moment awareness. Right now, it's just like this. Good, bad, pleasant, unpleasant. So we notice the isness of the moment. and relax into that. Give our thinking, brain and mind a bit of a rest. We can explore and investigate the sense of being, the sense of I amness, of just being in the moment. Each one of us can do that right now, here and now. If you find your mind is wandering, you can just open the eyes just slightly. Notice what is seen, sense impression of sight. Notice your response or reaction to it. Maybe hoping for some extraordinary meditative state. This is so mundane and ordinary. Well, if that's how it is, that's how it is. But actually, the mundane and the ordinary is very simple, very straightforward, very uncomplicated. So we just observe the breathing cycle, the in-breath, the out-breath. So noticing the transition from sitting quietly with the eyes closed or partially closed to sitting with the eyes open. Noticing the space and the area we're sitting in, the furniture, the colors, textures, fabrics, walls, ceiling. And we can observe what our relationship is to what we're experiencing. On one level, it's so ordinary, it's just what it is. Furniture, furnishings, four walls of a room with a ceiling and a door. We're so bombarded with sensory stimulation, whether it be social media, the devices that we use, constant flow of news, Netflix, Amazon Prime, the new channel, I believe, called Disney. It's a relentless flow of stimulating material, all designed to entice us, to grab our attention, to stimulate, arouse. And it's relentless, it just keeps on coming. Companies are measured by their growth and their ability to attract our attention. And add to that all the dramas of our personal lives, bills to pay, people to relate to, jobs to fulfill, roles to fulfill in family, relationship, or work. Just an endless flow of things to deal with. And the lovely term for it all is called samsara, which is this relentless cycle of becoming and ceasing, which applies to all physical, mental, and emotional phenomena. It applies to our bodies as well. Bodies come and bodies go. We've seen our parents grow older. Perhaps in many cases they're no longer with us. We see ourselves changing as well and growing older. We won't last forever. Well, the suffering of old age, sickness, and death can't be avoided. The Buddha grew old, was sick, and died. Someone may ask this question, what does the end of suffering actually mean? It obviously doesn't mean living forever or being healthy forever. So we can only really be happy or really be at peace if we're aligned with the nature of the way things are. And that's what the Buddha's teachings were pointing to. Bringing attention to the nature of existence. He wasn't teaching suffering. You don't have to teach suffering. You just have to notice it. Just be aware that when we want something and we don't get it, or we get something that we don't want, it makes us feel uncomfortable. We don't like it. So it's our resistance to the way things are that causes suffering. So what was he pointing to? He was pointing to a change of mind, change of heart, a change of relationship to how we experience phenomena, physical, sensory, mental, emotional. Each one of us has that potential to change our relationship to how we experience life. But the roots of attachment to existence, to sensory pleasure, are very, very strong, as all of us know. We get hooked onto something and we can't get it, or want something really strongly, very, very difficult to let go. But we hear again in these classes and other teachings about the practice of letting go, which can also be described as the practice of acceptance, of saying yes to how things are. I can have a few thoughts around that. What does acceptance of the way things are actually mean in practice? Does it mean agreement? Does it mean that we just let things happen and have no view, no opinion? How do we relate to the things that are obviously painful, hurtful? To others, those we love, or even ourselves? And that's really where the heart of spiritual practice lies. It's not about supporting or condoning suffering, cruelty that we witness on our televisions, on our screens, or read in the papers, or experience in our lives. So it's the way we experience life that makes all the difference. If we're in denial of the way things are, which means impermanent, because impermanent, never lasting long enough to be fulfilling. If we have a very strong sense of self with our likes and dislikes and our preferences, we will suffer. So our task is to accept the nature of existence, the characteristics of existence. But this is a major challenge. And looking at the sort of Buddhist model, the Buddhist model of how to approach life, the basis of practice is having an ethical, a moral life, one which embodies certain principles of respect, of kindness, of truth. And we see that, of course, in the basic 5 precepts of harmlessness, not harming others. As a basic injunction, it's a wonderful one. Why kill or hurt other beings? What does one gain by killing somebody or hurting somebody? What good comes out of it? These are questions that we are capable of asking ourselves. And most of us do have some sort of internal sense of what's right or what's wrong. And essentially the precepts bring our attention to how we respond to what we experience, taking that which isn't given. Well, I may want something, I get it, but if it's somebody else's expense or cost, how pleasing is it? Well, there are some individuals who don't have any conscience at all and they're quite happy to use something that belongs to somebody else. They just take it. But it creates disharmony. It adds suffering to the owner whose money or possessions one has taken hold of, but also disruptive to social harmony. And the sort of inquiry that we're talking about is a very deep inquiry. And it's good to have a sort of code of ethics, code of morality, code of behavior around one's life to create like a sort of stable platform from which to investigate and inquire into our experience of life. It sort of creates one could say it creates a refuge, really. We have certain principles that we live by and know that they're good and have experienced the benefits that come from having those principles of uprightness, of truthfulness, of respect and kindness towards others. We don't get lost in opportunistic value systems, which are just designed to maximize pleasure or benefit for oneself. The psychology of being generous, of being kind, being compassionate is very self-evident in experience. There's so much pleasure and warmth generated by being generous, by being kind. So actually it creates very beautiful states of mind. Being sensitive to other people's pain or needs is the price we pay, because we then also notice their suffering. But then the suffering we're noticing is our suffering. We suffer the same way as other people do. So when we become more aware of other people's experiences and see that they are just so similar to our own experience, it just changes our relationship to our environment. It breaks down the sense of separation of I want at your expense. So the benefits that come from not harming, not taking what isn't ours, not exploiting other people emotionally or sexually, but being truthful in our communication with ourselves and with others, and not seeking an escape from the suffering of life in altered mind states due to drugs or alcohol. We create a value system, a platform that allows us to sleep well at night without a guilty conscience. We find that we end up being trusted by other people. It reduces the suspicion that we often have of others. What's their motive? Well, everyone's motive basically is to be good and kind and truthful and respectful. They'll get reciprocated. So life becomes more harmonious. So when it comes to sitting meditation or practice, we call it practice as if it's something sort of technical. When we find time just to be mindful, just to sit, we can sit in peace. We don't have to worry about all the transgressions we may have made against other people and how we may be perceived by other people, whether they like us or don't like us because of what we've done to them. We sort of live with a clean conscience. And that's really quite priceless. Don't wake up in the middle of the night worrying about whether a lie we may have said has been discovered or will be discovered. Don't have to get into complicated stories justifying or excusing ourselves. So just on a purely emotional, psychological, and physical level, it gives a sense of calmness and peace and well-being. And living by these principles of goodness, if we can call them that, just principles of goodness, kindness, we're that much better equipped to cope with whatever life may throw at us, because life is not fair. We talk about rights and what is owed to us. A storm, a tsunami, doesn't care two hoots about what our value system might be. If there's a flood or a car accident, stuff happens, and so-called innocent people get killed or get injured. Can we be at peace with that? Well, that's a question each one of us can investigate and inquire into. But we know that a very important part of the injunctions or pointers that the Buddha offered was the practice of meditation, which of course is so closely associated with the Buddhist tradition generally. When we think of Buddhism, apart from thinking of monks and temples, we also think of a person sitting in a meditative posture. That's the image that comes to mind. And if you look at some of those beautiful statues and representations of sitting Buddhas or Bodhisattvas in the British Museum or wherever you happen to see them, they always communicate a sense of stillness. often have a little hint of a smile. But peacefulness is the message. Peace is the message. And the beautiful thing we discover with our practice with time is that state of peace actually is something that transforms our actions and our interactions with the world. Peacefulness does not mean passivity. It doesn't mean just sitting still and doing nothing. It can do when we're sitting formally for half an hour or an hour in meditation, because it uncovers and reveals to us our reactivity, this endless flow of internal, unconscious or semi-conscious activity. But if we persevere with the practice, we come to terms with it. We accept it as just the eddies and flows of life, the phenomena, emotional and mental. And after a while, we start discerning the background piece where all this is happening, which brings us closer to what the Buddha was pointing to, a state of mind which is intrinsically quiet, still, peaceful, accepting, out of which will arise whatever response is required to whatever drama or issue or situation where we may be confronting in life. So the investment we make in our value system, in our lifestyle, does have a result. It does have an effect. It means letting go of the things that are unwholesome, unhelpful in our lives. It means cultivating things that are helpful, hopeful, wholesome, supportive in our life. And that's the organic way we change. We go beyond our conditioning. We may be fortunate and have been brought up with a good value system, but at some point we grow up and start outgrowing our conditioning. And that's really what the individual journey of transformation is about. It's becoming an individual. It's not about I, me, and mine in terms of an individual, but it's living by a value system that has been penetrated through practice, through experience, through insight. And that changes our relationship to the changing nature of phenomena. And in changing our relationship to the changing nature of phenomena, we're more at peace with the changing nature of phenomena. So we come to and experience the end of suffering created by wanting things to be different. That doesn't mean we approve of suffering, but we respond to suffering in a way that is wholesome and kind and supportive, and also see it as a lesson. It's a reminder that we can't find peace and happiness in conditions. We might temporarily, we might be fortunate and have good conditions in our life, but we can't take them for granted. Conditions change. But when we finally wake up to what you can call our real nature, which is essentially our consciousness, our awareness, and know that that's quote unquote who we are, what we are, we find a peace which is always present, always available. We're living in it all the time. We are living it all the time, except we get lost in the contents of what we're aware of. So practicing mindfulness or awareness, noticing the interaction, cause and effect of phenomena, and most of all, waking up to the fact that we're present, that we're aware to this all. And this awareness never changes. The contents will change, but the awareness itself never changes. That's what's referred to in some Buddhist traditions as Buddha nature, or the chitta, the mind with a capital M. And the beautiful thing is that we all have that potential of waking up to who we really are, to what we really are. So those are the few reflections that come to mind as we sit here. But very open and very welcome to hear what thoughts or reflections some of you may have, if you'd like to share them with us. I think the simplest will be to unmute yourself if you'd like to say something or ask something, and we'll just see where the conversation takes us. We have about, sort of the time, we have about 20 minutes to 8, so say 15 minutes to give us time to have a closing chant. And we don't have to say anything if you don't wish. We can sit just quietly and just reflect on what's been said. You don't have to agree with what's been said, but you may have your own reflective process to go through.
Hi. So I was just trying to unmute, but I've now been able to. That's great. Thank you.
That's Imogen, is it? I can't see you.
Yeah, it is. Hi, Nick.
Hello,
yeah.
Hi.
I don't know if I'm able to formulate this question very well.
Uh-huh.
But I think something I've been thinking about was with the sort of things you've been speaking about and the sort of way in which one chooses to live one's life and the respect and truthfulness that you've the relationships one has will always vary, but sometimes I feel, should they? It's a sort of strange, the level of connection and intimacy you feel with different people. There's a sort of huge spectrum of that. But in a way, is there something in the teachings that's saying pull back in some ways, that relationships should end up in some ways, if you follow those teachings, actually all being more similar, because you're ending up following principles and ways of being that mean you don't have quite such a broad spectrum. Sorry, that's very abstract, but does that make sense?
I think so. We'll find out in what thoughts come to mind if I am addressing what I think you are. You know, the Theravada school, the tradition that this class is associated with, sees as a sort of primary path to enlightenment as being a monastic way of life. But we can take that too literally. It means the ability to relinquish attachment, to be free, literally, of like or dislike, to know like or dislike, but not be driven by it or act on it. So the qualities, and of course, I think it's important to stress, and I certainly am highly aware of it, and I'm sure all of you are, is that lay life is a different kettle of fish to monastic life. And yet at the same time, it brings up all the same issues. It's just the context is different. You know, the crucible of our practice as lay people is relationship in most cases. It's relationship to the world, it's relationship with people in the world, often a physical, intimate relationship. So we're open, as it were, exposed to the full blast of all the conditioning that our partners and our surroundings are the product of. The conditions that are generated or created in a monastery, as I've observed and witnessed, are really, in many cases, very challenging, because a lot of basic comforts are not there. You can't just go and turn the TV on or turn your radio on or walk around with the phone or grab a Marmite sandwich whatever your preference might be. You just simply can't do that stuff. And it's really quite interesting to go on longer retreats and be deprived of all the things that one takes for granted in our daily life and see how liberating it is and how freeing it is. At the same time, it's a bit artificial because it's a very contained, very contained, yeah. It's a very structured environment. But there's a lot for us, and I say us here as lay people living in the world, to learn from that monastic lifestyle and transfer into our daily life. First of all, there's a daily reminder that there are teachings which are pointing to a realization which we're all capable of. And we forget that all too easily. We go out into the street, start traveling on buses, get involved in work, and almost the last thing on our mind is our Buddhist practice often, because we're so caught up in the minutiae, the specificity of our lives. But if one, and it's not everybody, but I suspect many people in our group this evening do have a calling, as it were, a pull towards something beyond the quote-unquote ordinary, something a bit more meaningful. But to come back to try and stick to the question as I understand it, what does happen and can happen is that as we become more refined in our responses and less driven by like and dislike, by preference and non-preference, have less hatred, less negativity, have more loving kindness responses to the world, yes, we change as people. And if we are with people or with a person working through the specific challenges that each relationship has in a spirit of inquiry and trying to find a solution, something does happen, a sort of, not uniformity is the wrong word, a harmonization takes place, where one finds that one's value system does rub off on the other person. It works two ways, of course, yeah. When we're exposed to certain habits or patterns of behavior, it rubs off on us. It could create either a reaction or we basically in some way get conditioned by that exposure. But if you have two people, and we're talking here about a couple relationship, for instance, who have a similar value system, the challenges that come up when we are faced with a confrontation or a misunderstanding, the way we resolve it, if it's done with an attitude of peacefulness and an attempt to find a common shared solution, you find that the relationship just works much more smoothly. So in that sense, people become similar. But it doesn't take away their specific personality traits. It doesn't make them any less attractive or more uniform. They don't suddenly all turn into people wearing grey coats with shaven heads or whatever image one has of uniformity. Quite the opposite. All the beautiful creative things that the individual can contribute actually will manifest because they won't be in any way prevented by the other person. Quite the opposite. One is encouraged to be whatever one can offer, whatever creative element comes into the fore. Whether it's a love of flowers or arranging flowers, whether it's painting, whether it's music. But if it's all based on a certain commonality of respect for others and kindness for others, the atmosphere just becomes more wholesome, healthier psychologically, healthier probably physically as well. And most of all, healthy on the mental level in terms of insight and understanding. Imogen, I have no idea if I've answered your question, but hopefully pointed to something which I think is really important and worth reflecting on. I don't know.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so you see, being good doesn't mean being the same. Being good is simply being good. Being truthful doesn't mean that one loses one's individuality. If I look at the variety of people that I've met in all sorts of settings, monastic and otherwise, it's the variety of expression that is amazing. It's like walking into nature. It's like we're like flowers, we're like plants. There's so many varieties of plants. They all have certain common characteristics, but they're all varied, they're all different. And even within a species, each one is often slightly different in some unique way, which makes it very precious, very special. But all this manifestation conforms to the same laws or characteristics of existence. All impermanent, all coming and going, all beautiful when they're in bloom, and then beautiful in their own way when they start going out of bloom, and less conventionally attractive. But even in a compost heap, I mean, the amount of amazing life in a compost heap, well, it's life. One may go yuck through some evolutionary response to things that are potentially threatening, but even that can be conditioned. I know our grandchildren love holding worms because my wife encouraged them from a young age not to be frightened of worms. So they will hold worms and they'll dig around in a compost heap, and other children go, how awful, how terrible. And there's all these creepy crawlies in their hands. No fear whatsoever. Of course, one has to be cautious because there is an evolutionary survival instinct in avoiding creepy crawlies because some of them can be dangerous. So, just as we teach children to cross the road carefully, we have to recognize the difference between a tarantula and a friendly spider. So,
if I can say something there, matter of personal experience, yeah. In the kind of intimacy I have with the special one is always an intimacy which excludes to some extent.
Could you repeat that from the beginning? I missed the beginning.
Yeah. If I can say something coming from my own experience, I will say.
Please.
The kind of intimacy that we find in a special relationship when we are a couple.
Yes.
And it is an idea because one day you discover that you're not a couple, you're still yourself. Yeah. Is it a different quality of intimacy from the one that comes from being intimate with the experience itself and through the experience with the person you're talking to, because there is no barrier there anymore. Meaning you don't divide up the experience between that is another person, I am here, this is my emotion, that is yours. Suddenly there is a deep intimacy that comes from constantly letting go and discovering there are no barriers, occasionally.
Yeah.
And so it is a different quality. We are trading in a way. Yes, it is true that, the kind of intimacy that has got attachments attached carries a load of suffering as well.
Absolutely.
But, what the Buddha is offering is a different type of intimacy, which is the lightness of being. It's communality, it is being at one, not primarily with the person out there, but being at one with experience, and they are part of our experience.
Well, thank you.
It can go deep. I've been in hospitals and suddenly, been in very intense exchanges, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, people at the end of their life, they tell you things they don't tell their partner or whatever. Suddenly, no barriers whatsoever from other faiths as well. And
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the problem in sort of being too specific about a relationship, intimate relationship, is it varies so much. It's such a spectrum of possible interactions, which is why coming back to the basic principles of the practice of awareness, of noticing one's reactivity to what one is experiencing, is basically a transformative path. What happens in an intimate relationship is that one is challenged very, very directly on some very, very basic assumptions in a way that one isn't in a lot of other social interactions with other people. So an intimate relationship, a very close one, exposes one to a great deal of the other person's characteristics, which will evoke pleasure or aversion. Same principle, It's a question of how one handles that, because there is a learning process. You know, our practice as lay people is in the crucible of personal relationships in a way which has a different take on it, different tinge on it, different angle on it than monastic life might have. But as you say, the principles are exactly the same. How open are we to the immediacy of the moment? How open are we to the energetic quality of another person who might be dying or might be going through a lot of pain or a lot of suffering? How easily do we get stuck in mind states where we see the other as enemy or opposed to us? This happens in personal relationships all the time. You know, if only they could get out of my life, you know, why are they doing that? They're doing it and it's winding me up. Well, what we're dealing with there is core reactivity to something that we don't like. And of course, our sitting practice addresses that very, very directly. But not only our sitting practice, our moral code, the five precepts are constantly, in a sense, asking us to reflect on one's reaction to the other. And that's where the transformative aspect of a dynamic relationship to truth and experience brings about potential change. What, of course, personal relationships don't offer is what samadhi states can offer in terms of an insight and an experience of, one could say, an expanded state of consciousness, if one wants to describe samadhi as an interest. Well, that changes one's relationship even to one's partner, because a partner or intimate friend, yes, is still an embodied being. And as you said rightly, that embodied being at some point is going to leave one's life, and we're back in a sense, on our own. But what does on our own mean? Yeah, in a sense, we're never on our own, and we're always on our own, depending on how you want to interpret those words. But our ability just to be with our experience and actually know that our true home is never in another, never ever another. It might be temporarily, partially, as a transitional stage, but essentially our home, our real nature, is our consciousness, is our awareness, which is always present. And if one is fortunate enough to be in the company or the heart, or in the company, in the presence of other people who have a similar recognition or similar level of development, yes, one finds generally a more harmonious state of being. And that's what meant by Sangha. Sangha is people who have evolved beyond the personal, beyond the conditioned, yes, are aware to some degree or other of the unconditioned as being the only thing that's real. And there is harmony, there's inspiration, there's something which elicits unity, harmony, love, kindness, generosity. Those things just happen. And what form it takes, whether it's in a personal relationship or a more open or a more general relationship, that becomes secondary. What becomes is the quality, the degree of realization and personal transformation. That's what brings about the change. So that's really an extension of what Imogen, what you were raising, I think, and talking about. That's really what we're talking about. And that can happen in lay life, it can happen outside of lay life, in monastic life. Monastic life is particularly conducive, but then monastic life in many cases is very restricted, very conservative, and not necessarily inspiring. I've come across many monastics who really don't turn my lights on at all, quite frankly. But then on what criteria am I judging them? You know, it's another opinion, another perspective. What we all respond to is honesty, truthfulness, direct, all the qualities that we try and encourage in our practice. And once we start waking up to the beauty of that, we start transforming not only our lives, but the lives of those around us, because we obviously have an energetic influence on those we come into contact with. Right, I'm afraid we've run out of time. It's be nice if we could meet in person and have a bit longer to explore some of these themes, because they really are very thought-provoking. But it's a wonderful opportunity to sort of at least touch on things that are important to true well-being. So I think what we'll do is we might do a chant. I'm trying to think what chant to do. Let's do the Reflections on Universal Wellbeing. It's nice and short, and yet applies to all cases. That's on page 41. Thank you very much. Now let us chant the Reflections on Universal Well-being. May I abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. We will chant the closing homage, and then we can say goodbye to each other less formally. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo, the teaching so completely explained by him. Dhammam Namasami, I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho, the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Sangham Namami, I bow to the Sangha. So that brings our evening to a close. I'm not sure who's leading next week. I think it's Martin leading next week. I hope you've enjoyed the evening and look forward to seeing you again in a few weeks' time. Take care. Hope you have a good week and be well.